I am Ray, and I am here to stop the ego from ruining your life. Now, what is the ego? Ego is simply personal identity. We often have attachment to these different identities. If you think about religion or politics, when people have a strong attachment to these things, they get triggered easily, they get emotionally reactive, and they create endless problems for themselves. You see, the ego is fueled primarily by problems, by tension, through conflict. The ego is always at war with something. It's always judging reality, judging others, judging its experiences, all for one purpose and one purpose only: to reinforce one's own self-identity. Because in being able to reinforce our sense of self-identity, we feel safe in knowing that we are who we think we are. But the problem is that the ego is fundamentally an illusion. The ego is fundamentally insecure. That is why whenever you poke at somebody's political beliefs, religious beliefs, or even as silly as sports, people go crazy. People react extremely negatively if you go against any core identity, any core belief. Now you see, what happens is that when the ego creates a problem, this problem creates a sense of anxiety, of uncertainty. And to avoid feeling this anxiety, feeling this uncertainty, the ego motivates us to act, but we act in a way that is reactive. We act in haste. We feel, I gotta do something about this problem. It's gotta be done. I gotta do something. And in trying to solve the problem, we create a million other problems in the process. Now, at some point, we will find a villain, somebody who we can blame for all the problems that are happening to us. And when we find this villain, we pretend, we convince ourselves that we have the moral authority to engage in any means necessary to solve the problem, to destroy the villain. We become the solution for the problem, and the villain is the source of all these problems. And through this villain, we create a source of conflict, of tension, so that the ego can continue to reinforce itself. But you see, the ego is like a parasite. It has control over the host. It is manipulating the host in ways that it cannot even imagine. This aspect of the ego I call the monster mind, where it manipulates the individual into feeding it fear, worry, concerns, through making up problems, through the tension, through the conflict. So in the attempts of the ego solving the problem, it creates more problems, and then all future problems begin placed upon the villain. The ego never even considers that it is the source of all problems. And you see, the ego has no desire to solve the problem. That is why when it tries to solve the problem, it makes the problem worse. Because what the ego wants is more problems. It wants more conflict. It wants more tension. It wants more chaos. And so you will see in many people, whenever they try to fix a problem, it seems like no matter how hard they try, they never actually get to the solution. And so you can see people who are the slave to their ego, people who are a slave to this monster mind, their words are betrayed by their actions. They may complain and talk about all day how they want this problem to be solved, and yet it seems that with every action, the problem does nothing but get worse. And after all this stress, all this conflict, all of this problem, at the end of it, what you get? Nothing. You are worse off than you were before. That is how you can know the ego. That is how you know somebody is in the grip of ego. They do not solve their problems, they perpetuate them. In order for one to be free from the grip of the ego, they would have to take full responsibility. They would have to realize that the problem is not out there. The problem is 100% of the time always within ourselves. because the experiences we have in the outer world are a reflection of what is within. And so in order to change the problems that we continuously experience, we need to do nothing but to change ourselves. But that requires humility, and the ego is pride. The ego does not want to change. It likes comfort. In fact, you could say it hates change. And so to look in the mirror and really face oneself, not only would we have to take responsibility, but we would also have to change. And that is far more difficult for most people. They cannot handle the truth. You see, the ego only thrives because of the ignorance of the host. In truth, the illusion of the ego disappears. The tension, the conflict, the problems, they diffuse, and the ego has nothing left to feed off of. So the ego, in an act of survival, manipulates the person to continue feeding it its energy indefinitely into the future, until the person experiences enough suffering and says, I don't want to be this person anymore. I don't want to live a slave to the ego. I want to be free. And so if you want to ensure that you are free, do not blame, do not be a victim. Realize that you have the power to solve all of your problems simply by solving the problems within you. But this requires full responsibility, and it requires that you must change. So long as you blame others, so long as you feed on this psychological drama, you will forever be a slave to your suffering. But once you decide to be free, you will find what you seek. I am Ray. I wish you much luck on your journey. I encourage you to ask any questions you have in the comments down below.